Good morning. I realize every time I come up here, I jump up on the stage like that, and I'm like, someday I'm not going to make the jump. It's just going to get stuck on that side of the stage. Wonderful to see you here today. Happy that you're here. Happy Sabbath to you. We're going to be doing something a little different today. We are at part 4 of God and Money, and one of the things that we've been doing in the first 3 parts, I apologize if you haven't been here for the first 3 parts, because we went into a lot of depth, but the point was to go through a study of what God says about money. We drew out 45 principles from God's Word using over 130 verses, and today is the day that we put it together. So rather than having a lot of expository teaching today, what we're doing is we're taking the wisdom, the spiritual principles that God has already given us, and today we're putting it into an applicable plan. Now, this plan isn't God's way in the sense that these are the exact points. This is my application of principles, but I can assure you that having lived these out for 25 to 30, even some of them over 40 years, they work. They do work. I've tested them. I've tried them. I see that they work. And so what I'm presenting to you today is a way that we really should be approaching the Bible, which is we study to hear what God says. We don't go in to prove what we want. We listen to God to hear what he says. We take that. Then in taking that wealth of information, that wisdom from God, his instruction and direction, we then apply it. Because just as we were singing, the goodness of God is upon us. He wants us to be blessed. And one of the things that we have in our lives that we have to manage, whether we like it or not, is money. Right? Is anybody here living without using any money of any kind? Okay, good. So it's applicable to everybody. But this is the thing, bringing God into money and making sure that we understand that in what he teaches in his ways. So, can that back screen be switched? Gotcha. All right. So, we're going to talk about these principles. We're not going to go over the 45, but again, it's going to be more application. It's going to be less expository, less deep. But if you want deeper on this and you haven't heard the first 3 messages, we went into a lot of these principles from God's Word already. So this is more the plan, how to apply what we've learned so far. But let's start with some financial stats. How many Americans live paycheck to paycheck? Too many. So this was a test because in 2 of the previous 3 sermons, I told you this number, and I just wanted to see who was listening. 60. Who said 60? Beautiful. Thank you, Shirley. 60%. That's a little scary to me. Like 60% are dependent on that next paycheck coming. That's living tight. 60%. How many Americans feel they are stretched too thin financially? 56%. There are literally people that are living paycheck to paycheck that don't feel stretched. I don't know how that works, but anyway, Lending Club reported on that. The number of Americans who said they are worse off financially than a year ago, any guesses? 100. Wow, 67%. A little less than that 100, but good guess. Was that you, Jeff? Nice salary finance quote. How much have credit cards surged in the third quarter of 2022? And that's a bad, poorly worded question. I don't even remember my question. Oh, credit card balances are up 15%, the highest jump in 20 years. Credit cards are going up. That was from Forbes. What is the average credit card interest rate in the United States? It might be by now. This was last month that I was putting this study together, 19%, an all-time high for the average credit card debt, which means if you have $10,000 of debt, you're paying $1,900 a year for the privilege of paying somebody else their money back. How much debt did Americans pay off during the pandemic? Zero. You know what? When people get scared, sometimes they do smart things. $83 billion. They paid off $83 billion of credit card debt in 2020. That's kind of amazing, right? That's a big number. Total credit card debt was down to $770 billion by the end of Q1 2021. So, hey, that's awesome. What have we done since then? How much debt has the U.S. added since that time when it went down? to 770 billion. Yeah, it's as of quarter three of this year, it was up back to $925 billion. Friends, this is credit card debt. That means for every man, woman, and child in the United States, even little Atlas, who was just born, he now owes, on average, with the rest of the Americans, $2,785. It's for every person. But see, we know that Atlas doesn't really have that debt. Some of you don't have any credit card debt. Lots of people don't have any credit card debt, which means that it's a lot higher than that. But even the average family of four in the United States has $11,000 of credit card debt, paying 19% interest on average. You start to do the calculations, it's not a very good picture. And again, if you take out all the people in the United States that don't have credit card debt, you realize it's actually way higher than that. Because not every little kid's running around with a credit card, at least I hope not. All right, consumer credit card debt went up $52 billion in just the fourth quarter of 2021, the largest increase. So since we got out of this pandemic paying down our debt, we've actually gone bonkers back the other way. And it's never been higher. We are at the highest level of credit card debt. And again, credit card debt is consumer debt. It's things that you want to use and spend on, and maybe you don't necessarily need. So here we go. What are the biblical principles that govern putting together a sound financial plan? We're taking our 45 principles, and I'm going to lay out a plan for you that's very specific application. Number one, make God your business partner. How do you do that? The blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow with it, says Proverbs 10, verse 22. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first fruits of all. The increase of your barns will be filled, and your vats will overflow with new wine. Put God right at the beginning of what you do with your money, acknowledging by faith he's the one who gave it. Remember, we read about this in Genesis 28, 20 to 22. Jacob made a vow. He said, God, if you give me bread and put clothing on me so that I can come back to my father's house in peace, I'm going to give you 10% of everything you give me. He made a deal with God. And we should make deals with God. We should ask him to be involved in our life. We should say we don't just see this as our own life. We see this as our life. It's a shared experience with God. And seeing it that way is a beautiful thing. In Genesis 31, Jacob pointed out later that in that deal, Laban was trying to take advantage of him. And what does he count? He said, look, your father has deceived me in Genesis 31:7 and changed my wages 10 times. But God didn't allow him to hurt me. Remember, he had a deal where different spotted animals went different ways, and stripes or plain or whatever it was. And every time Laban said, well, now I want those, God said, well, I'm not blessing those anymore. I'm blessing Jacob over here with the different kind. And he didn't let Laban deceive him and hurt him. How would you like a business partner like that? See, I like God as a business partner. I want you to like God as a business partner because he's done some pretty amazing things with those that he works with. So make God your business partner. Next, work a proper amount to provide for yourself and others. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, Proverbs 10, verse 4, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. 2 Thessalonians 3:10, we command you this, if anyone will not work, he should eat. We are expected to work. We are expected to do good things. Notice, let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give to him who has need. So the whole philosophy is we're working not just for ourselves, but for others. It's amazing the buffers that get created financially when you think that it's not just for me, it's for me, my wife, my kids, my siblings, the poor person, the person in need. You never know where it's going to come. But if you're working that way, it creates amazing financial buffers. Notice Proverbs 24. We read this already in another message, 30 to 34. He went by the field of the lazy man, by the vineyard of a man devoid of understanding, and there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. We must remember the second law of thermodynamics. Everything is in a state of decay, Your finances will be in a state of decay if you don't manage them. Your health will be in a state of decay if you don't manage it. If you don't discover the principles that govern life and apply them to your life, you will suffer consequences. And ultimately, you have to tend and keep everything you have. Somebody could give you a big, beautiful house, but if you don't take care of that house, it won't be long before everything is overgrown, before the walls are breaking down, before it's covered with vegetation where it doesn't look good. This is the way life works. God is teaching us through this that things break down, things decay, things go south if we don't take care of them. It's the way God made the universe because he wants us to learn the value of work, the blessing of work, and to engage in it. And so poverty will come on you like a prowler, he says, if you don't pay attention to things and work. Proverbs 23:4, he also says, but don't wear yourself out to get rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. Some versions just translate this, don't overwork. If you're overworking to be rich, you're doing beyond what God would have you to do. So it has to be the proper amount of work. God told us that we should work 6 days, but the seventh should be the Sabbath of rest. 1 day a week we are to dedicate to the Lord to keep holy. We're to cease from our own labors and basically enjoy. Enjoy life. Enjoy life with God. Enjoy life with your family, but cease from labor. Don't work 7 days a week. All right, so work a proper amount to provide for yourself and others. Point number 3, give a first portion of all you make to God. In Malachi 3, verses 8 to 10, God says, will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring all the tithes into my storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and try me now in this, says Yahweh of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. That's a cool promise. Again, it's God is your business partner. If you trust in God as your provider, his name is Yahweh Yireh. Yahweh is provider. And you know that he is, and he says, now you need to give to me. Demonstrate that you believe in me as your provider. And he says, you pay these things out. He says, I'm going to open blessing that you don't even know, that you can't even imagine. So he is the one that said, test me now and try me in this. And as I've talked about in previous messages on this topic, this is something that my mom taught me, and I'm so thankful she did, because I've never known life without this. From the first time I started making money, I knew that this was where it was supposed to be, and I've never gone a single day without, and God has blessed me in many wonderful ways financially. So I'm very grateful to God for his partnership and for his leadership as my God. Proverbs 11, verse 24 to 25. There's one who scatters, yet increases more. There's one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself. This isn't talking about being foolish to make sure you pay out everything that you receive, but it is talking about not withholding what is good to someone else. So give a first portion of all you make to God. Point number 4, spend less than you earn. So important. Proverbs 21:17. He who loves pleasure will become poor. He who loves wine and oil will never be rich. Why? Because they're always chasing something to have to appease the flesh. But part of this is having a financial discipline. Proverbs 21:20. The wise have wealth and luxury, but a fool spends whatever he gets. Fools spend whatever they get. So realize that God wasn't intending that you would just take and then just spend everything. There is a process to wisdom that says there needs to be thoughtfulness. There needs to be a plan. And again, just as much as we plan to include God in everything in our lives, that we want him to be everything and everything, so we also need to think about how he is when it comes to the way we manage our money, but we need to spend less than we earn. Number 5, have a budget. Have a plan for what you do when the money comes in. So having this plan, notice the scripture, Proverbs 27, verses 23 to 24. Be sure you know the condition of your flocks. Give careful attention to your herds, for riches do not endure forever, and a crown is not secure for all generations. All right, so we don't have herds, generally speaking. Who has a herd in here? Okay. Flocks? Flocks. How many are in your flock? A flock of chickens. Okay, I've heard of a flock of seagulls before. I'm not sure about that. So we don't necessarily have these things, right? So flocks and herds, but what you do have is income, paychecks generally, profits that you might make. What do you do with them? He says, be careful to know what's going on. Give attention to it. In other words, don't just think that because you have it that it's going to work. Don't just think that it happens on its own. Don't think that it doesn't require management. And again, sometimes I think in this country, because we are kind of poor with our education when it comes to finances, we don't think that it requires management, but it does. Just as it's important to think about what you eat, it's important to think about how you care for your body, it's important to think about how you care for the possessions, it's very important to think about this. In all of these things, in all of this vanity, God is working out eternal weights of glory and teaching strategies and patience and wisdom and discipline and how to overcome covetousness and greed and theft and vanity, and realize that all of this can be used for God's glory. I wholeheartedly encourage you, bring God into every plan that you have, not just financially, but in every plan. But then watch him bless you when you put yourself in a path of blessing. And just a little side bit here. God created law. He reveals and teaches his law. And when we walk in the path of his law, we give ourselves the opportunity to be blessed. When we reject God's law, want to do it our own way, don't think about how the law applies to what we're doing, and consequently live some other way apart from his law, what we can also expect is cursing and not blessing. That's why God said, choose you this day which you will have, life or death, blessing or cursing. Obey me or don't obey me, your choice. And God gives each one of us the dignity of that choice. But the reality is, if you want to walk with God, then learn from him wisdom, because he's not just teaching about money and all that we've spent our time on. He's teaching us about life. He's teaching us about principles. He's teaching us about sacrifice and holiness and righteousness through all these things. Proverbs 6, verses 6 to 11 says, go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, having no captain, overseer, or ruler. Right? That's what that choice is. See, God's going to counsel you to choose life. I'm counseling you to choose wise ways, but you still get to choose. I'm not your captain, overseer, or ruler. All I am is a helper, a friend saying, let me show you what God says about these things, and let's put a plan together based on it. My plan is not the only plan. It is a plan, but base your plan on God's principles. But he's saying, look, consider her ways. Look at the ant. The ant doesn't need to be told what to do. The ant governs itself in going after, gathering her food, as it says, or supplies in the summer, and gathering her food in the harvest. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of hands to sleep, so your poverty will come on you like a prowler and your need like an armed man. God's saying, look at the example I'm showing. I created ants so you could see. They do what they need to do, and they realize there's a time for gathering. There's a time for going about doing their work. Notice Proverbs 24:27. Prepare your outside work, make it fit for yourself in the field, and then build your house. So there has to be a plan and even a process. God's saying, don't build your house first. Build your work first. Get the income coming in, get gathering, and then the house where you have these things. That is part of the blessing that comes from God. So, how do you budget your money? We talk about having a plan. Let's talk about a budget. This is super simple. This is a super simple plan. If you're like, I don't like a lot of details, I like it super simple. Here it is. Give God 10% of what he gives you. Right off. So, you get your paycheck, 10% God to you. Next 10%, pay it to yourself. Now, how do you do that? You're going to put that aside for you for later. That's for you. That's the profit you get to make from your work. And then everything else, live on the remaining 80%. So you figure your budget on that, 10, 10, 80. The simplest format you'll ever find for a budget, and it works. Give God 10, pay yourself 10, and we'll talk about what to do with that 10 in a little bit. And then 80, it goes for your expenses. Now, the thing is, living on a simplified plan does mean you better be pretty good with thinking, because in the 80 is going to be your food, it's going to be your housing, it's going to be your insurance, it's going to be your car, it's going to be your gas, it's going to be your electric, it's going to be all the other expenses that you have. So you better have a pretty good mind if you're going to go the simplified way. But just make sure that you're living less than the 80 and you're good. What you don't want to do is start spending all the 80 and then even more than the 80, and now you're going to be in trouble again, and you're going to be in credit card debt prison where you're paying somebody else for the pleasure of having enough for yourself. So you stay out of the credit card debt, you can live on this. So the key is live on only what God gives you and be content. That's really important. And that, again, is right out of the scripture. He says, with what things that you have, with these things be content. This is very important in life, and it's one of the key spiritual principles to look to God for blessing and to not try to steal to get blessing and not try to go around God for your blessings. Look to God for blessings. All right, Dave Ramsey, famous person with budgets and finances and how to get out of debt. Here's a little more sophisticated budget. So he has giving 10%, savings 10%, so there's your 10-10. How does he work with the other 80? 10 for food, 5 for utilities, 25% for housing, transportation 10%, health 5%, insurance 10%, recreation 5%, personal 5%, miscellaneous 5%, and that's his budget. General principles. Now, the thing for each of us when we look at our budget is we can put a budget together of what we think it is, and then it might be higher or lower depending on where you are. You want a little more home when you're making that amount. Your housing might go up to 30%, but that means you're taking from somewhere else. When I married Stephanie, she used to like to play a game like beat the budget because we didn't have anything. We were just starting from scratch. You know, that $400 paycheck I was getting a week, it was tight. So you want to beat your budget. You put your budgets together. The thing is to have a plan. Think about what you're doing with it and know this is what we intend to do. Now, again, some of us don't like to think ahead in the sense of being too detailed, too planning. That's okay. Stick with the plan that works for you, but at least have a plan. Put forethought into it ahead of time so that you know what you want. And look, in my personal life, I have things that I have plans for that are very loosely based, and I have things that I plan for that are very tightly based. Scott, when we were talking about losing weight in 2021, he told me, David, you got to start counting calories. So I did, and it worked. I lost 27 pounds following Scott's plan of counting calories. But when I did that, I also was like, I don't want to lose my nutrition, so I counted with every single thing I ate, the calories, the fat, the carbohydrates, the fiber, and the protein, every single thing I ate. Now, see, that's my way of managing, and that led me to, I think, asking for God's blessing, because I always say God was the secret to me losing weight, but it was also basically following that detailed plan. That worked for me. But some of you would be like, that is cuckoo. That's crazy. And she lived in my house. That was my wife, Stephanie, who said all those things. But I get it. I am cuckoo crazy sometimes, because sometimes you've got to spend the time to look at it and go through it. Now, Stephanie, she is the best budgeter I know, but here's another budget that is very detailed, very defined, and I like this way of doing it. I like having buckets. And notice what this budget does. So you create a spreadsheet. There are all kinds of free spreadsheet apps online. If you've never done a financial plan or a budget, it's easy. Enjoy the process that there's all this technology today to assist you. But this plan is super easy. You have your tithes in there. You have your things for your home, your travel, expenses, household budgets, auto budgets. And what you do is you get a paycheck that feeds your budget. So a certain percentage of the paycheck goes to the tithe, 10%, right? Second 10 goes to yourself. Another 25 goes to your house. You have money that goes in as a percentage to your auto and to your household goods and the food budget, all the different budgets that you have. You take your check, you feed the budget. Now you look at it like that is what I get to spend, whatever I have in that, and that budget gets fed. So you feed your budget, and you have all these categories, and then what you do is you subtract from your budget what you spend. So let's say you make $1,000 a week, and you get $100 for your food budget. So you know I got $100 for groceries. You take that 100, you go to the grocery store, you buy $40, you subtract the 40 from the 100, now you got 60 in the budget. If you don't spend all 100, that carries over. Now the budget starts to build, right? So your food budget can get a little larger. Your entertainment, if you're putting 5% to entertainment, put that $50 a week. Say you don't go 3-4 weeks. 4 weeks, that's $200. All of a sudden now you have a little bigger entertainment budget. But the point is, you do it based on saying, I'm content with what God gives me, I feed my budget, and then I take out of my budget. Very simple way to do it, very good plan, but it is more detailed. You've got to be more conscientious with every expense. This is not for everybody. I love this thing. Like, to me, this is like home run for me, because I want to know where it goes. I never want to say, where's all my money go? I never wanted to be that person. I was like, you should know where your money goes. Like, you don't have to know it down to the penny, but you should in general have some sense of that. Again, God said, he who is unfaithful in the ungodly mammon, how will he give him the eternal riches? So to me, I look at this as just one of the things that we do in life, that we say, we're demonstrating the character, the disciplines to say, plan it out, think it through, and then what is it for? Because I don't want to spend everything on me. I want to have enough to share with others. That's the biblical principle. Work so that you can give to others who have need. And so then at the bottom, you always know what you have. You always know what you have. And something comes up, you can always take from one budget and put it into another. That's your choice. That's your liberty. But at least you know where it's going. So again, not for everybody, just a way. But here's the truth. And Scott Sharpen, you're getting picked on today because you taught me this. Scott was a big-time consultant when we first met, and he taught me a lot of how to be a better consultant. What you measure, you manage. What you measure, you manage. You don't measure, you don't manage. And it is so true. I've used this ever since he taught me this process in my own business. Accountability to your plan is essential for it to succeed. So if you say, I'm going to do something, and then you don't measure what you're going to do, you may or may not. So that's why I do get on the scale every day. And that's why when I hit a certain thing, I have to go back to my plan of counting. I don't want to do that plan, but I need to get where I need to go. And then I loosen up and then I tighten up. But I measure what it is to get back. So you measure what you measure, you will manage. And that's how it is with finances. If you're not looking at it, you don't know where it goes, your plan is probably doomed for failure. So have a budget, have a plan to spend. Point number 6. Did I get that one? What was it? Oh, thank you, Stephanie. By the way, Stephanie, awesome job putting my slides together as always. Fantastic, thank you. Live debt-free. Point number 6, live debt-free. Proverbs 22:7, the rich rules over the poor and the borrower is servant to the lender. God says it. It's just the truth. It's a reality. So if you have credit card debt, you are now a slave to that person who lent you that money till you pay them back, and they're going to charge you an interest rate every month, and now you're beholden to them, and they basically do have some mastery over you in your life, because if you don't pay, there can be bankruptcies and all kinds of things that will hurt you. Another principle, Romans 13:8, owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. 1 Timothy 6:8, in having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. So again, be content. Don't go into debt to have consumables like travel or nice wines or bourbon or Starbucks or cigarettes or whatever things that you might be wanting to partake in. Don't go into debt for things. And I would say don't smoke at all, actually. So, point number 7, do not co-sign for another person's debt. Part of your business plan. Why? Proverbs 6:1-5 says, my son. I just love like how this starts here in Ecclesiastes. My son, if you've become surety for your friend, if you've shaken hands in a pledge for a stranger, that is, you signed your name to assure that they're going to pay their debt, He's like, you're snared by the words of your mouth. You're taken by the words of your mouth. Do this, my son. Deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, nor slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like the bird from the hand of the fowler. Get out of that. Do not co-sign for somebody else's debt, unless what you're doing is saying, I'm going to take the debt. And if they pay anything back on it, yay. But you should only ever take that debt and sign for a note if you really are saying, I'll take that debt. If it's not your debt and it's their debt and you don't want that debt, don't sign. Big mistake, and I talked to you about that earlier. I did that. I know that. Number 8, give to the poor and those in need. This is part of our plan. Proverbs 28:27, he who gives to the poor will lack nothing, but he who closes his eyes to them receives many curses. Sometimes people will look at the poor and find a reason to not give. We've got to change our thinking as Christians to say, no, God said, let him who stole steal no more, but rather work with your hands what is good, that you might have something to give to somebody in need. God's way of thinking is he loves to give to people in need. How many of you in this room can say, I've experienced the goodness and grace of God? How much of the grace would you have experienced if you were meeting all the criteria before you received it? See, God says you always have the poor. And look, we do have a problem where the poor take advantage of the goodness of heart to ask for money when really they need to just go get a job. So it is wisdom to look at a situation, or they're asking for money because they want to buy drugs or they want to hurt themselves. You need to have wisdom. But if somebody needs food, somebody needs clothing, someone needs basic needs, if you can find a way to meet a need and be a blessing, God's like, don't ever withhold that. Don't get to the poor will lack nothing. See, that's a faith statement. That you know that you should just take care of people when it's in your hand to do it. Don't withhold it. Just give. Give, and you don't need to be the judge of everything that goes on. Thank God that he didn't withhold his grace from me or his grace from you till you merited it. It didn't work that way. We received it because we looked to him in faith. So if God is saying these things to us, remember, he's also saying, will you treat people the way I treated you? I'm giving you of the riches of my grace and this hope of foundation, riches forever. Will you think the same way about others who have need? Don't withhold from the poor. Proverbs 19:17, he who has pity on the poor does what? He lends to the Lord. It's a great way to lend to the Lord, isn't it? He says you want to give to them, lend to the Lord, and what? And he, that is God, will pay back what he has given. So you're not putting yourself in a bad position here when you're giving to others, right? It's a good position. That's why Jesus said, if you would follow me, go sell your possessions, give it to the poor, and come with me. You're going to have great eternal riches. Luke 6:38, given it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. How do you want God to measure it out? If you are withholding, he says, I'm withholding. He said, if you're cursing, then I will curse. If you will bless, I will bless. It's always good to be on the right side of the ledger with God. Keep giving to the poor. Don't withhold your hand when it's in your power to give it. Let that be to God's glory, to the good of another, and then receive from the Lord whatever blessing he wants to put upon you. Point number 9, save for a rainy day. Proverbs 10:15, the rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. There's no buffer. There's nothing to prevent it. When you're living paycheck to paycheck and you lose your job, we have unemployment insurance in this country, but basically you're in a different position. And even if you get the unemployment insurance, it's generally less than what you make. So now things get tight real fast. So those who have wealth have strength when the time of things hitting your wealth. You build basically a tower of strength in a city with a wall around it financially to protect yourself and your family when hard times come. See, that's what the ant really is doing. When he says, consider the ant's like, well, you know what? Winter's coming. It's hard to get food when it's snowy outside. But if I get all the food in the summer, I can live all winter long. You know, you watch the birds, the woodpeckers. You watch the squirrels. They're gathering nuts. God shows us this all over his creation. There's a gathering time, a storage time, a consuming time, and then go gather again. It's the way it works. God set it up this way. And so there is this time. So you have to have some buffers in life. So keep about 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses in a savings account. When I started my business, this was important, to have flexibility when things didn't go as well as I wanted. Having some buffer in there was a really important thing. So save for a rainy day, put some money aside for the unexpected things that do occur. Number 10, pay yourself. So that's, again, what we talked about in the 10-10 plan. First you give to your partner who deserves it, God, 10%, then you pay 10% to yourself. Pay 10% to yourself, store and invest a portion of all you earn. Proverbs 10, 4-5 says, he who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a wise son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. There are many kinds of seasons in our lives. I mean, the big season is when you come out, you're pretty much not of help to anybody, right? You come out, you are full-time care for somebody else, right? And it can often end that way too. But in the middle, when you have this time that is about planting and things growing and gathering, that's what you do. So in your life seasons, there are times when you can do more. And usually what happens is you aren't producing anything when you come out. Then you start to gain some strength, some intelligence, some experience, and then you start the process of basically stirring up the ground. It's like you're churning it up. You're starting to plow so that you can start to plant. And usually, as you move through the years of your life, from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 and onward, you're able to make more money. Your harvest actually increases, usually as you go on, because you've become able to do more than you could when you were first starting work. Now you become more experienced, you have more, but gathering during this time for what? Because you know what's coming. Winter's coming, right? It was easier for me to work long hours in my 20s and 30s than it is now in my 50s. It's just a reality. I acknowledge that. I have to be more thoughtful about the way I spend my time because I get tired. I sat down on the couch, well, pretty much every day anymore, and I just fall asleep. So don't stop moving. That's my key to life. So keep going. Proverbs 6:6-11. We read this already, but again, you have to have this mentality that you have to store up for later because you're going to hit a winter. You can hit those winters in your life, but you don't know when the winter's coming. Right now, all the signs are we're heading into recession. People are getting laid off. It looks like things are going to really slow down in our economy. What side of that are you going to be on? You might hit winter in 2023, right? And it's kind of been a big winter already. There's lots of snow and lots of rain and everything. Maybe this is the year that we hit a winter financially. Have you been storing for this year? It's the other thing to think about, why you put aside money, but also how you invest to earn. So that's the next thing. Invest your savings wisely by design without fear or greed. As we saw when we went through some of the verses, fear and greed basically will take your money away from you real fast. God said, it doesn't work. You got to be diligent. The plans of the diligent lead to profit. Proverbs 21, verse 5. As surely as haste leads to poverty, get smart about it. There's so much available in knowledge of how to invest, and there's so many ways to invest, and a lot of them work. Ones that don't work, the ones that promise get-rich-quick schemes and basically bring you in, lure you in through greed. Don't go down the way of greed. We talked about cryptocurrencies. My son, he so wanted me to invest in cryptocurrency. Could I have done it? Yes. At the right time, everything was super low. I didn't do it because I kept asking the question, what is it? What is it? Now, could I have made a bunch of money and have people made a bunch of money? Yes. But I'm still asking the same question, what is it? What is it? You buy air, I don't know if you ever heard about the tulips in Europe. but they used to value tulips, and all of a sudden these tulips started going for massive amounts of money, and then everybody figured out, that's just a tulip. And the market crashed like overnight. Crypto's kind of like that, and as we talked about, look out, because the Federal Reserve of New York is already doing their own now, so they'll have the lead in on that. Proverbs 28:20, a faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. Don't put your investments into things that are based on greed, that are based on things being unrealistic. A lot of people can go into business ventures, capital venturists, that people that put money into small businesses, most of those businesses fail. So if you're going to go that route, you got to invest in about 100. And I think it just came out on the Shark Tank. Mark Cuban was just talking about, he's had some big wins from Shark Tank, but he said if you add it all up, he hasn't made any money doing it. All those investments, because you have losers, more losers compared to winners. Some win big, but you got to make up for all the losses. And you better do it really wide if you don't want to lose everything. Small businesses can go out very quickly, and especially when you're not in control of that small business. So again, Proverbs 28:28, faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. So how do you do it wisely? Here's some ways to invest in what you have. And it's a simple thing called SLICK, which is safety. That is, put your money where it's safe, that it's not at such a high risk. Measure your risk versus what your return can be. So put it in places that are generally more on the safe side than the high risk side. Second is liquidity. If you want your money out, can you get it? So if you're investing for your retirement or your old age, you don't want to put that into something that you can't get out. I've invested in businesses. I had my own business that I sold in 2016, but part of the thought was this asset I've been working, it's growing bigger, it's becoming a big part of my worth. I probably need to liquidate that. That means I need a buyer. And then I just had to keep praying until God sent along the buyer. And I prayed for years for God to send a buyer. Sent a really good buyer, actually. I still work for him today. But I had to liquidate. But now the funds that I took from that are in things that are liquid. I can move them into cash anytime I want, because I want to be able to go back and forth between the assets like stocks, bonds, real estate, or just cash when I want to put it to liquid. Yield. Knowing what the yield is for each thing. Your safety and yield should be connected. That is, the higher risk you take, you should have a higher yield. And know that you manage safety and yield very much together. Don't put your things that are high risk into low yield. That doesn't make any sense. If you're going to have a higher yield, you're going to have more risk in general. But if you're going to take the risk, make sure the yield is appropriate. And what is the goal that you have? We'll talk about that in a minute. And then catastrophe proofing. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. How many of you are old enough to remember Enron? Enron was one of the largest companies in the world. And people had $1 million retirements just in the Enron stock they had as employees of the company. And when Enron got found out because they were falsely inflating the pricing of energy and everything that happened in California, we had power outages because of Enron. Because they were faking there wasn't enough power to raise the rates so they could make more profits. It was actually quite wicked. And it was they just do these power outages to basically create a market so they could make more money. All of it got found out, everything that happened, and people lost millions of dollars virtually overnight. So you can't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't have everything. Try to spread your investments out. Now here's one of the things when we talk about yield. This is how powerful yield can be and the power of compounding interest. So if you look at this, basically this is $1 a day. This is $1 a day, and how over 60 years, $1 a day, how it grows. So at the end of, you can see the first column there, 365. So you have $365 going in. 12% interest on that money is $408 by the end of that year, based on a 12% interest rate, which is very achievable if you use proper stock market management, bonds with some leverage. I'll answer any questions you want later if you have those, because I just realized that I'm giving a lot of terms that you may not be familiar with. But in doing this, what I want you to see is the longer you let it grow, the bigger it grows. So you're saying literally you could take $1 a day for 60 years. Atlas, he's putting that buck a day in right now. And 60 years from now, he's talking about $3 million. That's how much it grows when you give it time, patience. It's just like things you plant. If you plant seeds in the ground, water them, give them sunshine, and go out there 3 weeks later, and you're like trying to dig it up to find out where's the fruit, you haven't given enough time. You've got to give it time to grow. You've got to give it time to mature. You've got to give it time to produce the fruit. Now notice how important this is. Taking the same amount of money for a person, investing $4,000 every year for 15 years. So basically, you're taking that money, $60,000 in total, but you do this over 30 years. But here's the difference. You put $4,000 a year for the first 15 years away, and then just let interest, your yield on an investment, run with it. Versus taking the same amount of money, the same amount of yield, but investing in the last 15 years. So you put your initial investment in year one, but then you don't start your next $4,000 payment until year 16 through 30. Notice the difference by doing it early. When you give yourself time to let things grow and mature and produce fruit, the difference in doing it that way is a difference between $1.7 million and $400,000. Just by putting it in at a different time. You put it in early and let it grow versus putting it in late. That's why when people say, start now, don't wait, because this is a reality. This is how it works. And we can't fight really these laws. They happen. Now here's something called the rule of 72. It's a very simple thing to understand when you're looking at your investments and how long do things take to grow. If you take the number 72, 72 represents the number that it takes for things to grow when divided by years. So let me give you a specific example. If you have a 10% yield, 10%, so you take 72 divided by your yield of 10% is 7.2. If you invest and earn 10%, it will take you 7.2 years to double your money, all right? So again, here's the thought. If you have 10%, you should expect that on average, if you're making 10% year after year or in the course of a 7-year period of time or a longer period of time with your stock management, basically it'll take you 7.2 years to double your money. Now what the difference is if you do 12%, you just cut it down to about 6 years. And 14 to 15%, you just cut it down to every 5 years. And that means a lot because the money that you are doubling requires the same amount of energy whether you're going from 10,000 to 20,000 or 1 million to 2 million. In the market, it's the same amount of effort. It's no harder for the market to take it from 10 to 20 or from 1 million to 2 million. That's why compounding interest is so powerful because the larger it grows, the more it makes. Remember what we talked about making money your servant? The longer you let your servants, those little dollar slaves, go out there and do things for you, the more time they have to build, the more time they have to do things that are really good. So when you look at the way you invest, you need to think about the fact that you have to manage your money, steward it before the Lord, and then put it in places that take good sense into mind. So again, this is not a financial seminar, but it is hoping to prick your interest to learn more about what you can do. Now notice this, if at age 25, you invested $3,600 per year at a 10% yield. Okay, so now we talked about $3,600. I said pay yourself 10%. So this would be a $36,000 a year salary, right? $3,600 goes in. And I'm actually talking on net, so let's call it a $40,000 a year salary. $3,600 per year at a 10% yield, and you contribute $300 every month. That is, you're making that $300 a month payment from 25 to 65. How much money will you have? So what we know is that at $3,600 each year for 40 years, that's a total contribution of $144,000, right? Over 40 years. At an average 10% annual yield over 40 years, you'll have $2.1 million. This is what strategy, patience, and discipline can do for you. Because God set it up that things happen with this compounding. There's this multiplicity of nature. It's like taking one seed. I have one tomato seed. I put it in the ground, it grows a plant, the plant produces fruit. Now, what's amazing about that miracle is if I pull one tomato, just one, off, I cut it open, I've got hundreds of seeds. One seed became hundreds of seeds. Now, if I just take that one tomato, from the one seed that I planted, I get to eat all the other tomatoes. I take every seed that was in that tomato and plant all those. Now how many tomatoes do I have? Now how many seeds do I have? But what so often happens in our lives is we gobble up that tomato too. We're not satisfied with the other tomatoes. We eat all the tomatoes. And then you don't have seeds to replant. And we do that financially. We get our paychecks and then we don't think about, I should put some of these dollars to work for me. I should plant some of these seeds because I don't want to work as hard as I'm working today. I want to have a thought about where it's going to go. And I want to grow wealth because look at 2.1 million, that person that was making $40,000 based on this and just putting in the $300 a month, that's a lot of money 40 years into it. So when people say, I can't, I have to question whether they can't. There is a way to do it. And how much money can you live on? I told you I would talk to you about how to consume. Once you've accumulated, the ant goes out and gathers all summer. How do you eat it in the wintertime? But notice this. How much money can you live on if you've accumulated 2.1? Basically, it's $100,000 a year, wisely managed for the rest of your life. That's a lot of money. So you cannot make as much money and end up actually with more money, and now you do have not only enough for yourself, but enough to share with somebody else. And that's the beauty of the way this works. So $3,600 invested wisely each year for 40 years will give you $100,000 a year for the rest of your life. That's based on a 10% yield, which is very achievable just with some good index fund passive investments that you can go into. But notice the difference between how it grows over the 40 years, how at the 10%, it's that lowest line there, it hits that 2 million mark, and then as it goes up, you can see what 12%, 14%, and 16% can do. That's why trying to maximize your returns without taking on more risk is so important, because you actually can have a lot more money. Your money can grow a lot faster, and you can have a lot more just by earning more percentages. And these things are all actually achievable in different ways, but you got to give them enough time to work and grow. So how do you achieve these? One, by wisely investing in stocks, bonds, real estate, small businesses, and other things. You know where you would best invest. But look, over the last 100 years, stocks 8 to 10, bonds 4 to 6, real estate 7. Now, a lot of you say, well, I make a lot more money in my real estate since, I put money in a house, and then when I sold my house, I made a bunch of money. The reason is because you use leverage. If you put 20% down on a house, the bank, you owe them 80%, but you own 20%. If that house doubles in value, so let's say you put down the 20%, let's just say $20,000 on a $100,000 home, and now the home, which is $100,000, goes to $200,000. How much money did you make on your initial investment of $20,000? You earned $100,000. That's all yours. That's what leverage is. Leverage is saying, I put down 20% on a home, the home doubles in price, I get all of that earnings because I'm paying the debt off to the bank. That's how you make money in real estate. So people say, only 7%? Well, most people make a lot more than 7% because when they put money into a home and it appreciates over time, you sell, and when you sell, you get everything you accumulated in that process. The bank doesn't get a cut of your profits. That's how you use leverage. Now, leverage can be a great thing. It can be a terrible thing. The 1929 stock market crash was caused by leverage because you could borrow up to 90% on a stock. And everybody is looking at the stock prices, and guess what happened? The market drops 10%. Everybody that was leveraged with only 10% in, guess what happened to them? With stocks, you have to settle up every day. Good thing we don't have to settle up on our homes every day, right? You get the property, you get to keep it. You have time if you get upside down for it to recover. But you can use these things with management and with leverage to get you much better returns because there is an upward bias. This is the last 100 years of the Dow. There's an upward bias. There's an upward bias in real estate. There's an upward bias in stocks. And with bonds, those rates fluctuate continually, and it goes up and down the same way. We just finished a 40-year bull run on 10-year treasuries. Basically, the markets just fell. Well, now it went back up, right? There's a lot of losses being taken in bonds. And fortunately, within the last couple months here, bonds really turned around and have softened their fall. So it's important to avoid big losses. And I think this is very true in life too. There are certain things that can really knock you down in the game, right? So you can have the unexpected pregnancies. You can have the unexpected financial losses. You can have unexpected things. And so in valuing your own monies, you want to know, if I lose 25% in the market, what will it take to get back to even? Remember, it takes 33% just to get back to square. That's why you want to avoid large losses. If you lose 33%, you got to make 50% just to get back to even. So avoiding large losses, remembering to take into mind safety. So we want to invest wisely, and there's so many books for you to go for. This was just to try to wet your whistle, if you aren't doing it now, what to do. Next, once you have your money, your financial plan should include your withdrawal plan, and that is a 5% flexible withdrawal plan. 5% is not a hard number, it's just a number. Generally, I would say 3 to 5%. So how do you do it so you never run out of money? So if at the beginning of this year I have $2 million and I want to take out 5%, I take out $100,000. If I have $2 million next year, I take out 5%, that's $100,000. If that drops to $180,000, or excuse me, 1.8 million, take out 5%, that's $90,000. I took a $10,000 haircut. But if you only ever take out 3% or 4% or 5% of all the liquid cash that you have, you're never going to run out, because you only took out that percentage. And that percentage will go up and down based on the value of the money you have, but you won't ever completely run out. You'll always have 95% of what was there left. Now, with investments, things go up and down, so you have to be careful to consider that when you do it. So how do you avoid it when, yes, it is possible to have a 10, 15, 25, even 33% drop in the market? It's what we had this year, right? So how do you make this work? First, accumulate what you need plus 50%. So if you say, I need 100 grand, we already said 2 million, 5%, that's 100 grand. You need 3 million. Now some of you are saying, wait a second. If it takes me 40 years to get to 2 million, how long is it going to take me to go at 10% to the 3 million? Well, using the rule of 72, it'll take you about another 4 years. So you basically add 50% by just adding more time to what you do. Thinking about the math and the way God made multiplication work and all of this compounding interest and yield, you need to accumulate 50% more. So if you need 100,000, you need to go to 3 million. You need 50% more. When you take that annual draw of 5% based on your current values, you do that once a year. You take out whatever you have, multiply it by the 5%, that's what you get for that year. That's it. But if you start with 50% more, what do you start with in year one? You only needed 100,000. Your first withdrawal was 150,000. You're already in a surplus when you start consuming your money. Then what you do is you set aside that excess. If you only needed 100,000, withdraw. You now take that excess and put that excess into savings to cover for market downturns. So in other words, you take out your 150,000. You give yourself a little more, you're going to spend on 110, and you put 40,000 into a savings. Now, when there is a market downturn, and you're going to see a drop because that year 5% of your assets is less, you've actually been setting aside for it too. And all the time, you have something there to help you. And then keep your funds invested in age-appropriate mix of stocks, bonds, and real estate, earning 6 to 9%. In other words, you want to go and save for things like high dividend stocks, like really strong bond programs that will earn you about 6 to 9% a year doing that. And here's what's great about that. It grows at a faster rate of what you're taking out. So over time, your money should grow a little faster than the amount that you're consuming. You're taking 5%, you want to have yourself making 6 to 9%. so that you're creating a buffer even on the amount of money that you have. And that's how you do it. Now, there's a great website by Paul Merriman, if you ever want to read about this, because he has done all kinds of statistical analysis for decades showing this is the way so you don't run out of money and your money will actually grow over time. You put your stock market returns, your bond returns next to this, it actually does very well. So what about the story of a woman I actually knew who said that she would do it, but she doesn't have the money? I looked for one thing in her life. It was smoking. She was smoking regularly. She was a habitual smoker. And I said, how much money do you spend a week? She said, $60. $60 a week on smoking. Okay. So what if instead of smoking, you took those $60 and you invested it? It would be $3,120 annually. And if she followed the plan for her 40 years of work life, at 10% with that amount, she'd have $1.6 million. In other words, right there, smoking money becomes basically what you can consume about at 5%, $80,000 a year. When you think that buying bourbon, buying wine, buying cigarettes, going to the movies, going to a concert, yes, I'm picking on all you guys right now, and looking at you. So, sushi came in too. Guys, look, there's enough enjoyment when you're taking that out of your 80%. But if you're taking it out of the 10% you should be paying yourself, you're stealing from yourself. And look at, you as an old person, I had this conversation with me a long time ago. I talked to David at 70, and David said, if I do make it here to 70, you better have taken care of me because, this is our life together. That conversation was a good one to have because David at 70 said, I don't want to be working as hard as young David. Let's do our work now, but I want to be, hopefully, God willing, enjoying my relationships, wife, kids, grandkids, whatever it might be that God blesses me with, but I want to be focused in a different kind of work at that point in my life. Work will never stop for me, but different work than it is as a person that's gathering, then I'm going to be consuming. So you have to have the conversation and say, wait a minute, is that $60 a week habit worth giving up this? And maybe you say, well, I'm going to keep one $60 a week habit I have, but I'll give up the other one. Maybe you have that kind of discretionary cash. But the point is, she had the money to do it. And here's the thing, God gives you the choice. You don't have to do any of this. You can do it any way you want. Just know there's consequences that come with the choices that you make. Don't be deceived to think when God says, I set before you life and death, blessing and cursing, that he isn't saying, but now you get to choose. Don't be intimidated by the choice, but be smart about it. Choose wisely and walk with God in the way that you choose. So again, how much would that make? $82,000 annually for the rest of her life using the 5% flexible withdrawal rate. I think it'd be worth it, but you have to decide for yourself. And guess what? That's only living on that 5%. She would get to leave $1.6 million or maybe more to her heirs. So that $60 habit isn't just about providing you the $82,000 for the rest of your life. It's also about leaving something for your heirs. That's how this can work. So we have that. Follow the 5% flexible plan. I've shown you how you can do it with a little amount of money. But then number 13, God did say, leave a financial legacy for your family. Proverbs 13:22, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, but a sinner's wealth is stored up for the righteous. And that is our presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Again, this is just a plan. It's not the plan. I hope that through talking about money, you've been able to see that we can take a study of a biblical principle, over 130 verses, and there's many more I didn't even read. We've been able to look at principles that God has taught, extract those, put them together, and reconcile those principles, and then build a plan that is laid on the foundation of those principles. That's what I've shown you. I have practiced this plan, and I can tell you it works well. Many of you have different plans, and they work well. Great. But have a plan, and make sure that in all things you give honor and glory to God, that you take of what he's given you, not just about having the money. It's what the money can do in your hands to use it for good purposes, to trade off by giving the unrighteous mammon, the ungodly mammon of this world for riches that can pay. Use the unrighteous mammon to make friends for yourself in heavenly places, that when the ungodly mammon of this world is just waste, you'll have plenty of riches that last for eternity.